Alright, welcome to the Lazy Daisy tutorial. Today I'm going to be sharing with you how to complete the Lazy Daisy stitch, as well as different types of things that I like to use Lazy Daisy for, and a few other things along the way. So to get started here, my number one trick for success with any stitch type is making sure that your fabric is set up well. You want to tap it, and it should be very nice and tight and kind of sound like a drum. That is going to help you with any stitch that you are working on, is making sure that you have your fabric nice and tight. So let's start with this little basic flower over here. I'm using 4 strands of thread here. For Lazy Daisy, I typically like to stick with between 3 and 6 strands, just so that it makes a nice and defined shape. So let's go over the basics to start. I am going to come up right at the base of the petal shape that I'm trying to fill in. I'm not coming up right in the center. I'm going to think of each petal sort of individually and think of like the spot that's right next to the center for this petal. That's going to be its base. So I'm going to come up right through that spot. Now, one little tip to think about is for Lazy Daisy, we're going to end up going down through the same hole we just came up through. And the problem is you're going to have your knot on the back. So what I like to do is take my non-stitching hand and sort of grab that knot and just move it to the side ever so slightly so that it will be out of my way for just a second while I put my needle back down through the same hole I just came up through. So step 1 is come up through the fabric right at the base of the petal shape you're stitching. And this holding the knot trick is only for your first stitch, because once you move on, you won't have a knot there anymore. So this is just for the first one. So I've got that knot kind of just a little bit to the side, and I'm going to angle my needle down through the same hole I just came up through. I just don't want it to go through that knot, because then it'll pull all my thread through the fabric. So I'm angling my needle. So I'm losing my, okay. Angling my needle, it's going right back down through the same hole we came up through. And I'm going to begin to pull, but I'm going to leave a loop out instead of pulling all the way through. And I want that loop to kind of fall around the loop shape that I'm stitching. Now you can come back up through the fabric on the inside of the loop that you've created at the very tip of the petal shape that you're trying to stitch, and right in the center of it. So I'm going to push my needle up. I'm going to kind of hold this loop shape with my non-stitching hand now so that the threads stay sort of not twisted and in one direction. And I'm going to pull in the direction of the loop that I'm creating. Just slowly, and I'm going to stop right there. If you pull too tight, you're going to get more of a straight line. Let me show you. I pulled really tight, and you could do that in certain situations. You might want it to be a tighter loop, but in this one I want it to be more petal shaped. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can loosen that up a little bit. So you really only pull until you get the shape that you want. So more like that. And now to anchor your loop down, you are going to make a down stitch just on the other side of the loop. So right now you can see that my thread is on the inside of this loop shape. I want to take my needle and put it down right on the other side of that thread. Not down the same hole, but right next to it. And this will anchor your loop into place. Now you can repeat for each remaining petal shape in the flower that you're working on. Go down through the same hole. I'm going to leave a loop out this time. Sometimes I like to hold it across with my non-stitching hand or hold it apart. Come up on the inside of that loop and pull, until I get the shape that I want, right about there. And then I will anchor this down by making a down stitch just on the other side of the thread. And I'll repeat that up on this one. Perfect. Make a down stitch just on the other side. And I'm going to do one more. I like to sometimes just make sure that all the threads are kind of even before I make that final lazy daisy, so just sort of even them out if they aren't. Pull, and then make your anchor stitch. So usually on the inside of a little flower I'm working on like this, I usually do it with a different color. I'm just gonna show you with the same color. I like to make a little French knot in the middle. This sort of covers up any of that blank space and just defines your flower a little bit better. Oops. Let's make that a little bit more towards the center here. There we go. All right, so there is the basics of Lazy Daisy. Let's do Lazy Daisy shapes that are a little bit longer. All right, let's fill in these petals now. I added a few French knots to the top of this kind of daisy flower, and I'm gonna use all 6 strands here to make these petals nice and chunky. And then once we get them filled in, I'll also show you a little trick that you can do to kind of like highlight your Lazy Daisies. So I'm going to start with this one all the way over here, and I'm going to pick a base point to come up through the fabric to start. And I'm going to go back down through that exact same hole I just came up through. Now with my non-stitching hand on the underside of the fabric, I'm sort of holding my knot to the side just a little bit so I can slip my needle into there. Now I'm going to hold that loop out over this petal shape, come up at the tip of the petal, and pull until I get the shape that I want. I'm not going to pull too tight though. And then I will anchor this down by making a down stitch just on the other side of that loop. Not on the inside of the loop, on the outside. Let's repeat for the second one. Again, sometimes I just kind of like to hold that thread as I'm pulling to sort of keep it nice and straight and not tangled. Kind of keep all the threads moving in the same direction. Always make sure you're going back down through the exact same hole that you came up through. So look, see here, I didn't quite get it going all at the same time, so I'm going to pull this out a little bit more with my non-stitching hand until I can sort of get this all even again. Now that it's all even, I will finish making my loop. Let's repeat that 2 more times. And one more over here on the side. Okay, so once you've made your initial lazy daisy stitch and filled in the shape, you can grab either the same color or a different color, and we're gonna actually fill in the petals with a little straight stitch. So what I'm gonna do is I chose a different color. I'm still using 6 strands because I really want the one straight stitch to fill in as much of that space as possible. And I'm using the same golden color as I used on the top of the flower here. So I'm going to start from right next to that kind of knot that I created, and I'll bring my straight stitch down the center of this petal and end it right next to where the loop sort of starts, and just pull tight. You could put a couple in there depending on how wide your lazy daisy shape is, but I like to generally just try to do one straight stitch to fill in. And if it doesn't completely cover in that space, that's okay. You could always go back. You could always go back and kind of do one more on top of the one that you did if there was a little bit of extra remaining space. Like on this middle one, I had a, oops, pulling my knot up through here. See if I can get this fixed. Okay, so I just do one more on this little guy so it gets all filled in, and one more over here. Towards that same center point, and there you go. Now I have a really cute flower filled in, and I've just added some more definition and a variety of color. Again, you could do that with the same color or a different color, depending on if you wanted it to be full of all pink. And so that's just a fun little trick you can add to your lazy daisies. Okay, lazy daisy is also a great stitch for not just flowers petals, but also for leaves. So this is a little vine I have right here, and I'm going to start by just doing probably just a back stitch here up the center of the vine. Now that I've got that all filled in, right now I'm using 3 strands of this green thread, and I'm going to fill in each of these little leaf buds with actually a lazy daisy. But in this case, I'm going to pull my loops really tight. So I'm coming up through the fabric, I'm going to go back down through the same hole, leave my loop out, come up on the inside of that loop, basically just that tiny stitch length away at the tip of that little leaf bud shape, and I'm going to pull all the way tight here so that my thread really kind of joins in on itself. And then I'm still going to anchor it down just on the other side of the thread here. So these are like little tiny lazy daisies that make nice little leaf bud shapes by pulling really tight instead of leaving some. I kind of twisted that one, but that's okay. Let's try this one. Go back down through the same hole, leave a loop out, and one more. So this is an example of pulling your lazy daisies nice and tight to create little leaf bud shapes. Voila. On this one over here, I'm going to use all 6 strands and pull my lazy daisies not quite as tight to fill in these leaf shapes. I'm going to do a back split stitch for the stem on this one just to change it up a little bit. So I'll get that all filled in to start. Okay, so now I'm going to fill in each of these little leaves coming off of my stem with a lazy daisy. But this time I just won't pull so tight. But I am using 6 strands, so I'll be able to get it kind of close. There's just gonna be a little bit of space there, and then anchor it down. So this is just another example of doing like a vine with some leaves coming off of it and using lazy daisy as your leaf stitch. And that can be super cute. I've got one more thing I'm going to show you in this next little flower down here, which is just grouping your lazy daisies together. So stay tuned and we'll do that. Okay, done with this one. One final thing you can kind of think of when using lazy daisy is to group them together to create a sort of textured floral. So I'm going to start with this little loop down here. Again, I'm using 6 strands because I want these to be pretty thick and I want them to all sort of blend together. Oops. And I'm going to keep these a little bit tighter, maybe than I would for a bigger petal shape. And you'll just slowly kind of start to fill in each petal, like so. So this can be maybe just something you wouldn't think of right away to make a cool floral, or even fill in some sort of space. But you can group lazy daisies together to use as more of a filling stitch. Just have to be mindful about where you place them. you can kind of see this starting to come together.